Good morning. Welcome back to Flawed Dogs. And we last left them. Cassius was going to push Uncle Hamish and Sam the Lion over the balcony. And then he also shredded up the baby Bruno's sweater. Interesting. Chapter 11, Beast. Several months had stripped the trees of their color, and winter was descending. The school bus stopped at the gates of the McLeod estate. The door swung open like a dozen faces, while a dozen faces pushed up against the window, staring, waiting, expectant. Inside, the bus driver turned around to face Heidi, sitting there 3 rows back. The girl looked terrified. The bus driver raised an eyebrow. Out. Heidi took her backpack and held it in her chest, like a shield. She stepped hesitantly down the steps and onto the dirt driveway, looking around nervously. She looked up at the kids staring down at her from the windows, waiting for something to happen. Heidi moved toward the house slowly, trying not to make any sounds on the gravel with her shoes. She watched the afternoon shadows of the shrubbery and gate for any sign of movement. The kids' eyes in the bus did the same. The driver quickly shut the door, but didn't drive off. She too stared out with wide eyes, watching, waiting, looking. Heidi glanced up at the looming topiary bushes carved into the shape of huge dogs and shuddered, but not from the growing chill of the late autumn. No, it was from fear of the thing that was surely near. The beast. It waited for her, somewhere close. It watched. Heidi knew, as did the others, that it would soon attack, without mercy. Heidi spun. A figure leapt toward her neck from the nose of the huge dog bush overhead. The kids in the bus screamed, "Run!" And she did. The beast hit the ground behind her, and she could hear its foul, murderous breath exhale. Heidi slipped on the gravel, landing painfully on one knee, her backpack slipping off. She left it behind and made for the safety of the house, 100 yards up the hill. The beast followed, snapping at her heels, teeth flashing, voice screaming in a primordial howl. The kids screamed again and pounded the bus windows. She wasn't going to make it, as usual. The beast leapt, its claws digging deep into her argyle sweater. Heidi dropped from the impact, hitting the grassy berm beside the drive. Rolling onto her back, she fought off the snapping jaws while the horrified audience in the bus continued to scream. The beast's terrible mouth reached Heidi's neck, and she surrendered to the inevitable, lying back against the ground, while his tongue did what it always did at 3:40 p.m. every school day, and lathered the lower part of her nose with dog saliva. The kids in the bus shifted from screaming to cheering. Michael Green turned to Shayla Morphy with a look of triumph. "She made it to the 3rd sprinkler head! She's getting better!" The bus drove away, the voices of the kids fading. Heidi lay on her back in the cold grass. Sam sprawled across her chest, front feet on either side of her neck, licking above her top lip. "Sam the Lion missed me, huh?" asked Heidi. "Did," said Sam. "You wonder how my day was?" Well, Esther Newberg asked to borrow my gym locker because she'd forgotten her combination, and then she stole my gym clothes, wrote my name all over them in big letters, and pulled it over a helium balloon, and sent it up over the school assembly while we sang the national anthem." "I'm so sorry." "This is why I like dogs," Heidi said. "Exactly. We don't fly clothes." "How was your day?" she asked Sam. "Busy. Slept. Ate a potato bug." You didn't rip up any more of baby Bruno's clothes?" "I told you," sighed Sam. "That wasn't me." "You didn't puncture his baby bottle with your teeth? Or leave gnawing marks on his crib yesterday?" "Nor did I eat the gardener." "Uncle doesn't know what to think. Miss Violet thinks it's Cassius. Mrs. Beaglehole told Uncle that it must have been you. She wanted to check your gums for splinters." "Anyone check Beaglehole's gums?" asked Sam. Heidi studied Sam's eyes, not his teeth. She laid her head back down and stared up at the gathering clouds. A snowflake landed on her nose. "You just wouldn't do those things. I know it. You couldn't hurt anyone." "I feel bad enough about the potato bug." Heidi stroked Sam's head, kissed him on the forehead, and then gently pushed his head down so his long nose lay under her ear, where she could feel his breath on her neck, warm, moist, and safe. She laid both her hands across his back as if someone were about to pluck him from her grasp. She felt his chest rise and fall with his breathing, now snoring. She couldn't help but match her breath with his. They breathed as one and slept. There's a picture of them doing that. From the second-story window of Mrs. Beaglehole's room, Cassius sat staring down at Heidi below with Sam sprawled across her neck. One thought circulated through his beautiful head. That should be me. Cassius looked up into the sky while the winter's first good whopper of a storm began to move in, the darkness descending across the rolling hills. A gathering gale pushed frozen rain bouncing off window panes, sounding like needles falling on glass. The poodle's black eyes became even blacker. It's time, he thought. There's Cassius, staring out the window. Chapter 12. Screams. As always, Sam woke up for his 5:55 a.m. pee. He uncurled from Heidi's inner knee, slipped from her bed, and padded down the stairs and outside to the kitchen doggy door. Sam stood on top step and sniffed with distaste the freezing dawn gloom beyond the porch overhang. Winter's first snow was falling fast and thick. How uninviting, he said. He turned and looked at the rows of potted petunias that Uncle Hamish kept safely out of the weather near the warmth of the house. He lifted his leg and watered the one on the far right. It looked the most needy. Returning inside to the kitchen, he was surprised to see Cassius, who normally slept until noon in his curlers. The poodle trotted up to him with a look of deep concern on his face. There's a crisis, dear Sam. Poor baby Bruno is missing from his crib. Missing? Said Sam. He can't even crawl. Do human babies fly? I fear he's been taken. Go, please, check the eastern ridge. I thought I saw a dark figure moving up there through the blizzard. You're better in the snow than me. My fur catches the flakes like Velcro and I freeze into a dogsicle. I'll wake the others. Right. Sam sprang with urgency. He turned and tore back through the kitchen dog door into the driving snow and toward the eastern ridge beyond the aspen grove. He was forced to bound like a rabbit, his short legs struggling in the deepening drifts. He was past the aspens and close to the crest of the ridge before it even occurred to him how preposterous a thing it was that Cassius had just said. Come to think of it, Cassius was built perfectly for bounding around in Vermont blizzard. Plenty of fluff for insulation and pole-like legs. If anyone was suited for becoming a dogsicle in the snow, it was Sam, not Cassius. Just as this bit of obviousness was breaking through the early morning fog of his still sleepy brain, he saw the baby. As soon as Sam left the house, Cassius turned and loped back into the kitchen to the cook's quarters. He entered Miss Violet's room and stopped. He could hear the measured breaths of the woman and confirmed that she was still asleep. He continued into the adjoining small sewing room that had recently been turned into a nursery for Bruno. He looked at the crib, its front wall hanging down, exposing the empty interior. His chew marks were all around the clasp. Bruno's blankets were ripped apart and strewn about the room just as Cassius had left them a few moments before. Cassius decided the scene needed a coup de grace, a final colorful brushstroke to the masterpiece. The poodle knelt down and took his right paw into his mouth. He hooked his sharpest tooth between the tough pads and sank it deep into the softer pink flesh below, just enough to break the surface. Then he rose on his hind legs until his front feet lay on the baby's bedding. He held his paw over the white linen adorned with colorful cartoon characters, and carefully let 3 bright red drops of his own blood fall just to the side of a stuffed bear's head. Cassius stepped back, satisfied. He looked toward the still sleeping Miss Violet in the adjoining room. He set his feet wide, arched his back, adopted a convincing expression of alarm on his bony face, and began barking. Miss Violet's screams started very soon after. There's him putting the blood in the bed. It's what we call a frame job. He's framing somebody. All right, chapter 13, Fired. At the top of the eastern ridge, Sam looked down through the blowing snow at the bundle of blankets tucked into a small blueberry bush. With a long nose, he prodded the folds until Bruno's little face emerged. The baby yawned, stretched, and looked up at Sam. He smiled as the snow tickled his nose. Sam was confused, but only for a second, for his own nose had picked up a familiar scent as he pushed the blanket open. A scent easily identified in a house with only 2 dogs. Cassius. His mouth, his saliva, his hairspray. The morning fog suddenly cleared in the dachshund's now bracing brain. The fur along his backbone stood up as the final scent he sniffed overwhelmed his senses. Danger. What Sam didn't sense at that moment was that the threat wasn't to baby Bruno, but to himself. Sam pulled the blanket folds back over the face of the giggling Bruno, grasped the material, and pulled the heavy bundle from the bush and onto the soft snow. He heard Cassius barking. Turning at the sound, he saw Miss Violet in the distance stumbling up the ridge and through the storm toward them. Behind her, Uncle Hamish and Heidi, everyone in their night clothes despite the cold. But Cassius was ahead of them all, barking and baying. He would reach Sam and the baby in seconds. One thought crowded out all others in a dachshund brain still churning, trying to make sense of it all. Keep the baby away from Cassius. Sam spun and ran down the opposite side of the ridge, his neck muscles bulging as he struggled to keep his head high, the bundled baby dangling under his mouth. Miss Violet saw this and screamed again. Behind her, Heidi and her uncle pushed through the snow with a frantic urgency. Sam! What are you doing, Sam? Screamed Heidi, her voice hysterical and breaking from a swirling mix of confusion and fear. Sam reached a low stone wall which blocked further retreat. He set baby Bruno carefully against the wall and turned to face the quickly closing Cassius. Violet, Hamish, and Heidi reached the top of the ridge and looked down on the 2 dogs, now facing off. Sam was outmatched, and he knew it. The poodle was 5 times his size and weight. The little dog planted his feet wide, placing himself between Cassius and the child. He put his head low. I don't understand any of this, Sam said, but I know you're not touching the baby again. Yes, said Cassius slowly and evenly. I am. Sam locked terrified eyes at Cassius, his lips curling high in anger for the first time in his brief life. He spat forth a vicious snarl, punctuated by barks and the snapping of his teeth that echoed through the small valley. And it was here, in a distant icy meadow below a black sky at the dawn of a terrible day, that Sam would demonstrate the other thing besides kisses that dogs uniquely offer people willingly: their lives. But the people watching from the ridge above that day didn't see all this. All they saw was a crazed, probably very ill dachshund, intent on killing an infant and threatening anyone that would stop him. Cassius stepped toward Sam, who made a lunge at the big dog before spinning around to move backward toward the baby Bruno, where he would make his last stand. This is when Uncle Hamish raised his rifle and fired. That would be a good place to stop. I gotta shut the door, though, because people are coming home. All right, chapter 14, Descent. Sam lay on his side in the snow and was even more unsure about what was happening than he had been just a few seconds before. He knew there was a searing pain across the top of his head, but didn't know that it was from a bullet that had grazed his skull, leaving an ugly, oozing gash with the scent of blood. A first for this dachshund. He couldn't move, but his vision cleared, and he could see Heidi clawing through the snow trying to get to him. He watched Uncle Hamish, still in his pajamas, drop the gun and tackle her just as she reached him. Heidi's hair tangled and her mouth open. Sam's ears were ringing too loud to hear what she was screaming. To Sam's relief, Miss Violet picked up her baby and frantically tore off the blanket that still wrapped him. She and Hamish scanned the naked child and seemed reassured by what they saw. Little Bruno smiled up at his mother as if it was a game. Sam could see Heidi, crouched on her knees and crying, staring at him, but not moving any closer. Don't worry, Heidi, said Sam quietly. Everything's okay. The baby's safe. Why aren't you coming to me? Then he saw Cassius move close to Miss Violet, now on her knees as well, holding baby Bruno close. Cassius stared at Sam carefully while he pushed his mouth in close to the bundled baby. Closer. No! Exploded Sam. Stop him! Stop him! Don't you all see? Cassius will kill him! Sam didn't realize that he was snapping his jaws again, lips curled into a frenzied rage. Instincts, cold and unsparing, ruled his actions now, and his feet clawed the snow wildly in a desperate attempt to get between Cassius and Bruno once more. The others backed away from the writhing, snarling little dog lying in the snow, now red with his own blood. Uncle Hamish pushed away a sobbing Heidi with an arm across the girl's chest. Then Sam watched in a shocked daze of incomprehension as Hamish raised his rifle again. He pointed it directly at him. Sam closed his eyes and said simply and quietly, "Heidi?" But Heidi had leapt at her uncle and knocked the muzzle toward the ground. Sam's hearing had returned enough to hear her scream, "No, Uncle!" Sam watched the man crouch before Heidi on her knees and hold her shoulders. He looked into the girl's horrified eyes and spoke something slowly, carefully. Sam could only hear a few words. "Can't touch him. Very sick and must be destroyed." The girl collapsed into her uncle's arms, shaking with sobs. He held her, maybe for the first time. Violet reached out and laid a hand on the girl's back while she held Bruno close. Sam's mind swam in confusion. The pain from the bullet pushed to the background. He tried to stand, to reach Heidi, to tell her that everything was okay, to lick the underpart of her nose, to kiss her. But he couldn't. Instead, he felt himself being wrapped in a cloth, maybe a bathrobe. Uncle Hamish carried him, but not in the direction of the house with the others. They were going over the stone wall toward the aspen forest. Sam caught a final fleeting glimpse of Heidi being pulled up the hill toward the house by Miss Violet. The girl kept turning back to look at Sam. Cassius moved next to her, leaning in. Protectively, possessively. Sam looked farther up the ridge and saw Mrs. Beaglehole standing serenely, watching it all without emotion. As Hamish carried a limp and increasingly faint Sam into the forest, Sam heard the last of Heidi's voice, halting and desperate, calling to him, blending with the growling howl of the wind. "Forgive me!" she was yelling. Then blackness descended on Sam's world. This is Uncle Hamish raising his rifle and firing. And that is the end for this read and deed. So, happy Friday, Fun Sock Friday. See you later.